Chris O'Connor here. Join our fabulous curmudgeonly community on Facebook at facebook.com/group/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist dedicated to this episode. Now, let's get started.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. When yours truly curmudgeons met 30 years ago as freshman students at Syracuse University, we bonded over music. There was also wrestling, movies, and sports, but music was the main thing. In the fall of 1993, I was still enthralled to grunge and was falling in love with REM and their back catalog. Chris, however, while liking most of the same stuff I liked, was particularly taken during this time by a new band that had just broken big the past summer by the name of Blind Melon. I had already heard the hit single No Rain, and it didn't really make a great impression on me. To me, it just sounded like a second-rate Grateful Dead knockoff. Of course, I was several years away from developing a strong affection for the Dead's music, and I was still a year away from discovering Phish. The Black Crowes were more my jam when it came to retro revival rock. Nevertheless, Chris kept chirping into my ear about how great this Blind Melon album was, and how they were going to be huge. He even went out of his way to make a very high-quality cassette copy of the album and gave it to me. I still remember that evening when he dropped by my dorm room to give me the tape. I was listening to the Rolling Stones' 1969 classic album Let It Bleed, and in the middle of realizing that this was one of the greatest records I had ever heard in my life. I cannot forget Chris sitting there with me on my bed, shooting the shit while listening to the Stones, and him having the audacity to actually say he thought Let It Bleed sucked. Thankfully, he has since amended his opinion of that record to the tune of a 180-degree turn, but the conversation that fall 93 evening soon turned to Blind Melon and that cassette he had so graciously given for me. He encouraged me to listen to it on headphones later on before insisting that I put the tape on so we can listen to at least a little of it together. It was at this moment that Chris uttered the words that would live on for as long as I have a memory. Blind Melon is the best CD I have. Bold words indeed. Well, I eventually did give it the headphone listen, and I thought it was just all right. A bit jam bandish, lots of noodly guitar work, some pretty complex rhythms, and the singer wrote some pretty deep lyrics. However, over time, I have to admit that the album grew on me. It got better with each listen, and its many charms unfolded as all acquired taste albums do. Now, in my middle age, I recognize Blind Melon's self-titled debut for what it is. One of the most unique and interesting rock albums of the 1990s, in that it's the midway point between hip, alternative rock, and classic rock-oriented jam band music. No, I don't think the album is as awe-inspiring as Chris thought it was in his young and naive days, but it's an album that's worth reminding people of. If Neutral Milk Hotel, Lauryn Hill, Portishead, The Breeders, and Jeff Buckley can have entire legacies based on one album, then surely we can afford Blind Melon the same status and a ticket out of the one-hit wonder gutter. So, let's do a little deep dive into this much underrated album by this much underrated band as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Blind Melon is the best CD I have. Well, not the best CD I have, but what 18-year-old Chris thought back in 1993.
So, Blind Melon really was the best CD I had when I was 18. It was better than Led Zeppelin 4. It was better than Dark Side of the Moon. It was better than Hotel California. It was better than Quadrophenia. It was my album, that spoke to my sensibilities from where I was at when I was 18. And anybody listening can kind of relate to this because you all had an album when you were 18 that you were ridiculously passionate about, and had that immature sensibility that poured into that record. And then 3 years later, you're like, meh, you all had it.
Yeah. But I look back when I was 18 and I think of those records. I still kind of love those albums, though. You know? I mean, I still love the Breeders' Last Flash. I still love Nirvana's In Utero. I still love, I did fall out a bit from Stone Temple Pilots' Core, but I got back into it years later. I realized, that is a great record.
I mean, I'm not saying that I don't like this Blind Melon record anymore. I mean, I love it, actually. It's still one of my favorite records of all time. Yeah. But what I'm saying is in terms of perspective, I was a little short on perspective, man. Yeah, and I remember actually when I first met you, you were bashing out to STP's Core. That was kind of your jam on cassette. It took me another year before I got into CDs. Yeah, I was going to say CDs hit when I was a sophomore in high school, and my first CD ever was Hotel California, and Blind Melon. That was a better CD that I owned than Hotel California. So that's all there is to it. Oh, I'm telling you, you know where rock albums are still better than anything else on the planet, right?
Gee, where is that?
That's in the parallel universe, which is still a beautiful and wonderful place that we visit on every episode, where green is blue and dark is light, and all is right with the world because rock is still dominant, and long live rock. It is not a niche. It is central on people's brains. People live for the big hair and the leather jackets and the fuck you attitude. And that's basically a fancy way of saying we cover new and newish records that we think that you ought to be into as heavily as you might be into the Taylor Swifts and the Beyoncés of the world. That said, it's kind of interesting this week. Arturo and I are both covering young female kind of rockish singer-songwriters. We're a little bit opposed on which is better or which is more admirable, but let's get into that now. Arturo, who are you covering on this episode's Parallel Universe?
Yeah, this is the new album or newest album by Squirrel Flower. Interesting name. And the name of the album is Tomorrow's Fire. Squirrel Flower is the musical project of Boston-based singer-songwriter Ella Williams, and her, or their, if it's a band, whatever, but it's really her. It's a musical project. Her fifth album is by far her best one yet. In a world where quality rock music is still a part of the pop cultural zeitgeist, this would be her breakout album that would put singles on rock radio and her face on the cover of magazines. To put it bluntly, this is the kind of folk-tinged indie alternative rock that Boy Genius wish they could have made. In fact, I'll take it a step further and say that in this universe, if Ella Williams had the corporate label backing and high quality public relations that the ladies of Boy Genius have, she would be a bigger star than any of the three of them.
That's bold.
That's how good this album is. Alley Light is an exquisite slice of rocked up country pop that blows away 90% of what constitutes country music these days, not to mention the atrocious bro country that's slathered all over the radio in this universe, right? When a Plant is Dying is a better slow burn, corrosive guitar, crazy horse jam than anything Neil Young has done in 20 years. The indie guitar power pop of In the Skate Park, all one word, is catchier, hookier, and more authentic than anything Soccer Mommy or Snail Mail ever do. And I don't mind those latter two bands. Canyon has the primal power and cut to the gut emotional lyricism that evokes the best of early PJ Harvey. Even when she slows it down to an ethereal, folky level, it's way more convincing and haunting than the juvenile, whiny mope fest that so many of her peers indulge in. Our next episode is going to reveal each of our top 10 albums of the year. Spoiler alert, this will be high on my list. Chris?
No, okay. That surprises me. This album I do like In the Skate Park. I think that's a fun single, and yeah, in a more fair and just universe, that would be on rock radio in heavier rotation. The rest of it, I would say, is merely tuneful, and it's a little too middle brow for me. Again, it's tuneful. It's got its influences. It's got that alt rock influence. It's got that folk influence. Dare I say, a little bit of shoegaze, just a little bit. But I don't know. Maybe, and this could be the thing, that if you juxtapose it against the album that I'm covering this week, that maybe that's a little too much of the same kind of ballpark as far as female singer-songwriter rock that evokes the alternative days of the late 1990s in some respects. So I think that's probably what's skewing my notion of Squirrel Flower. I'll definitely have to check her out more. Definitely compelling, but I'm not as moved as you are. I see it as more of a 3.25 star record.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see your record.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, at least we agree to disagree. Yay. So it's speaking of which, while we're on that, and while we're speaking of this, I guess you could say that, is it a trend? I don't know, but there is all of a sudden a rush of young female singer-songwriter types that do confessional type lyricism, and with a slight rebel edge. Arturo already mentioned the ladies of Boy Genius. Lucy Dacus is the best of these ladies, by the way.
By far.
And but you've got Phoebe Bridgers, and you've got Lana Del Rey, I guess, in some respects.
Lana Del Rey's not there. There's nothing rebellious about her. Come on, dude.
I know.
She just does the same whiny mope, the same whiny mopey piano love ballad over and over and over and over.
But
again. Hey, she writes the same song in the same album over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, at least she thinks she's a rebel. But anyway, the artist that I'm covering this week, she goes by the artiste name Blondeshell. Not Bombshell, Blondeshell, get it? And it's no coincidence, probably, that she is now serving as the opening act for Liz Phair as Phair embarks on a tour celebrating the 30th anniversary of her brilliant album Exile in Guyville.
Right.
Why?
Makes sense, because she sounds just like Liz Phair.
Yeah, she sounds a hell of a lot like Liz Phair. She has the same kind of melodic sensibilities, the same kind of no, not quite as explicit as Liz Phair, but the same kind of here I'm up to my neck in boys, and here's a few songs about those. So about Blondeshell, this is the project, and this is the band, and this is the inspiration of a young woman in her 20s named Sabrina Teitelbaum. She comes from the mean streets of Midtown Manhattan. Another commonality of a lot of these girls, a lot of these women, are that they come from fairly privileged backgrounds. I mean, it kind of helps when you're trying to break in the record business these days. Right. And for years, she performed as Baum, but that never quite got off the ground. And so she switched things up and adopted this Blondeshell persona. And this album, which is self-titled Blondeshell, was released this past April of 2023. And I think it merited coverage now because she's on the verge of crossing over into the other universe. I mentioned that she's got the opening gig for Liz Phair. And also this album, surprisingly enough, and this did surprise me, is number 11 on Rolling Stone's year-end album Best of list
Rolling
of
Stone's
albums.
year-end album has a lot of bad albums on there, dude.
Yeah, I know it does, but
there's nothing cutting edge about them anymore.
Yeah, it's a surprise. There's like 4 or 5 records in the top 20 that actually merit being in the top 20.
Yeah.
Amazingly enough. But yeah, nothing cutting edge about Rolling Stone. But however, she does show up at number 11, so it just kind of shows that fairy tales can come true. So about this record, obviously there's a Liz Phair influence, so you can just imagine that it's very solid alternative rock. It's mid-tempo, and it's more soft rock done hard, if you know what I mean. It's soft rock with an edge. Very seldom does she ramp up with big guitars. It's not quite as piano-ish as a Fiona Apple might be, but it's definitely not quite as balls out as like the Breeders might be. So it's kind of like middle of the pack. I think that there's
so basically she's just as middle as Squirrel Flower is.
Yes, she's just as middle as Squirrel Flower is. I do say this. I think there are some songs, some of these women that are the Taylor Swifts, in terms of the confessional pop, she's kind of the queen. But Lucy Dacus and some of those, I think, do have an influence on Blondeshell's songcraft and some of her lyrics. One of the highlights of this album is a song called Sepsis, which is an amusing but engaging mid-tempo little rocker about
it's one of the best songs on the album.
Yeah, it's about a guy she shouldn't like, and she even calls him a dick, but she also does kind of like him and keeps him around long enough to figure out that she really doesn't like him. And so it's kind of I don't know if you call it a breakup anthem or it's just kind of like shrugging her shoulders of like, what do you want to do? I dated a bad boy. Oh, well. So good stuff. Opening track, Veronica Mars, is a 2-minute sort of rocked out ditty that paints a scene from her, what must have been her early childhood, because it's all about cultural references of 2004 and what was going on in her living room at the time. So it's kind of like this, a statement on her early female empowerment tendencies. Because if you remember Veronica Mars, that was a big hit show with young women, Kristen Bell in it. So there's the song Olympus, which may actually be the best song on the record. It has an acoustic opener, and it has the line "I'd still kill for you," and it really is a song about obsession and calling a significant other part of her addiction. And I would say it's really strong convention or confessional. Again, Dacus influence is definitely heavy there. And then the other kind of surprising song, probably the loveliest song on the record, and so maybe she has a future as a pop chanteuse, is Joiner, which appears near the end of the record. And it's a wash and vocal overdubs, and it has, the sentiment, I think I want to save you. So you can say that this record, she's nothing if not straightforward. I will definitely give her that. And so those are the highlights. So I would recommend checking out this record. Like a lot of other records that we've covered on the podcast this year, it's pretty good. I put it at about 3.5 stars out of 5. I think it's worth the investment because, yes, she is gaining in profile, and chances are the next record she comes out will be much more successful, and she's gonna gain a following. She's kind of like the modern day equivalent of this. The guys our age will remember the Liz Phairs and the Juliana Hatfields. She's kind of like this generation's equivalent of that. Right. And so expect to see Blondeshell it coming to a theater near you. Arturo.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I gave it 3 out of 5. I think it's pretty good. I mean, I think she's all right. I think Blondeshell are okay. I particularly like the songs Veronica Mars and Sepsis. I think those are by far the 2 best tracks. Veronica Mars may be one of the best opening tracks of any album this year. My thing with her is that get back to me when she gets a little older and matures a little bit and develops her own sound. Because right now she's a little too indebted to her influences. Yeah. She's a little too beholden to 1990s alt rock. I love that stuff. And it's great that there are young modern bands and artists today that are influenced by that. But I think she lays on her beholdenness to those bands a little too much.
Yeah.
Very, very, very heavy on the Liz Phair influence.
Yeah.
Obvious Juliana Hatfield, obvious a bit of the Breeders. It's just like, like fill in the blank with any 1990s alternative rock band, especially one fronted by a female. And there you go. And there's Blondeshell.
Yeah.
But I think she's got talent. Like I said, get back to me when she comes up with her second album, and hopefully she develops a little bit more of an original sound. And then we'll see where it goes. We'll see what happens. I mean, I think it's a decent start. So let's see what she does for her next record.
Yeah. And as we're wont to say on the Curmudgeon Rock Report about all things late 90s, ain't nothing like the real thing, baby. Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose. Or maybe like a firehouse, if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. Blind Melon. Let's talk about this band. We kind of made light of my fondness, like overwhelming obsession based fondness for this band and their first album when I was 18 years old. But there's merit to why we should discuss them. They were a surprisingly great band, incredibly underrated. Yeah. Most of you have probably heard the song "No Rain," which exists in perpetuity on whatever they call modern rock now and on some classic rock stations. You probably know of the B-Girl, which is part of 90s pop culture lore. But that's probably all you know, which is too bad because this band had a lot of substance and originality to them. You're talking three guys from Mississippi shack up with a guy from Pennsylvania and a fallen star, as it turns out, from Lafayette, Indiana. And they were like the least Los Angeles band imaginable that formed in Los Angeles. So we just felt that they were worthy of covering it because, again, there's a personal connection here because, as I mentioned a little earlier, I think most of you have that band that when you were 18 that you adored, that maybe you grew out of, or they were that moment in time band. But, you still revere them, but maybe you don't revisit them or you don't have that active connection. Well, hopefully this discussion will, one, inspire you to go seek out Blind Melon's music, but also will inspire you to revisit your own 18-year-old man crush or women crush, as the case may be. And, just sort of tickle your soul here, at this age. We're talking now to our peers, but also folks in their 30s and even your late 20s. There's, a lot happens between 18 and 28, folks. Yeah. So there's that. With that said, Arturo is going to set us up. Talk to us, Arturo, about this band and its history and its formation, and describe this band for the uninitiated, and tell the story of how they got to where they got.
Right. Yeah. We'll definitely describe the music in detail when we get into the album itself, their self-titled debut album. But as for the Blind Melon origin story, the members of Blind Melon came from all over the place, as you alluded to earlier. Singer Shannon Hoon came from Lafayette, Indiana, the same hometown as that of Axl Rose and Izzy Stradlin of Guns N' Roses. More on the Hoon-Rose connection later. Guitarist Roger Stevens and bassist Brad Smith came from West Point, Mississippi, and Christopher Thorne, the other guitarist, came from Pennsylvania. The four got together in LA, Los Angeles, 1990, and unable to find a drummer they liked, Stevens and Smith set out for a fellow Mississippi buddy, Glenn Graham, to join them out in LA as their drummer. They settled on the name Blind Melon after bassist Brad Smith's father, who derisively used the term to describe hippies. And his band they kind of were neo hippies.
Nice.
The band self-produced and released a 4-song demo called The Goodfoot Workshop, which got them considerable major record label attention, leading to Capitol Records signing them in 1991. They got together with legendary Neil Young producer David Briggs to record an EP's worth of music, but the band were unhappy with what they considered to be a slick and overproduced sound, which is really weird considering this is David Briggs we're talking about.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah.
I mean, this is the Neil Young guy,
Yeah.
But in any case, despite the abandoned EP sessions, the band's profile managed to increase due to a certain world-famous rock star that singer Shannon Hoon was buddies with. Indiana boys who connected shortly after Hoon moved to LA. The friendship of Axl Rose and Shannon Hoon opened some doors for Blind Melon. Have you ever heard the Guns N' Roses song Don't Cry from Use Your Illusion 1? Well, that's Shannon Hoon doing the backing vocals. He also did the backing vocals on several tracks on both Use Your Illusion albums. This led to Blind Melon embarking on a tour in late 1991, opening for Soundgarden. Talk about two completely different
I was going to say, that must have been an interesting experience.
Yeah. The band decided to relocate to Durham, North Carolina to work on pre-production and finally hone the songs that would end up on their debut album. They chose to work with Rick Parashar, who produced Pearl Jam's classic debut 10 and recorded the album in Seattle's London Bridge studio, mostly live with minimal overdubs. If you listen to the record now, you can definitely detect a live in the studio, right in your living room feeling, which is one of the beautiful things about that album. The album finally came out in September 1992 and didn't sell well after Tones of Home was released as a single. However, when the song No Rain was released as a single in early 1993, it slowly and steadily but surely became a big rock radio hit. After MTV started playing the video, the legendary one with the little girl dressed as a bee, the song became a huge international hit and propelled Blind Melon and their self-titled debut album to mainstream and multi-platinum status. No Rain went as far as number 20 in the Billboard pop chart. The album went on to sell 4 million copies. So they became stars after this. So, Chris, before we dive into the album itself, what of the Blind Melon origin story?
Yeah, there's a couple of things about it. One, it speaks to the power of connections in the music business. I mean, obviously, from what I understand, Axl was a high school classmate of Shannon Hoon's older sister. So that was kind of how they
their connection. Yeah.
That was kind of their connection. But being able to, and if you think about it, Shannon Hoon, and we'll get into his voice later, but he had a beautiful and powerful voice, but he also had a really lovely falsetto. If you think about it in terms of a 2-part harmony with Axl, it's kind of a perfect insert into Don't Cry.
Yeah, well, if you can make Axl Rose sound good, you're pretty damn talented.
Yeah, I was going to say, Don't Cry. I mean, it's the one Guns N' Roses song that proved that they actually were from Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I mean, great power ballad, but definitely an LA song. So there's that. And then also, people don't realize, young people especially do not realize just how powerful MTV was back in the day.
Sure.
In terms of being able to make an artist, break an artist, and become, sort of drive cultural relevance. As I understand it, the picture, the cover of the debut record is a picture of a friend or a relative of Hoon's as a kid at a high school, like a school assembly show, dressed in this bee costume. And so the director of the video took this concept and made her a character, and then put her along with the band singing and bopping in a bed of flowers. In a beautiful flowered garden. And so the kind of psychedelic feel of the song and the video and the visuals and obviously the icon of the bee made them instantly relevant. And not only that, but that song is catchy as hell. And
Yeah.
so,
Well, it's
yeah,
my least favorite song on the album, but anyway.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, I guess you could say it's mine too. Because well, see, that's tricky because it's so much different than the rest of the album too.
Sure.
I mean, it's got more of a hippie vibe. It's got more of a pop vibe. It's almost like they did it as with being conscious of getting on the radio in mind. But hey,
Right.
it sure as hell worked.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then they're just they were an interesting combination of neo hippie and straightforward classic rock. I mean, there is some Bad Company lurking
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
and so, straightforward classic rock, but neo hippie jam rock, and then their own kind of unique skittering rhythm, and and their secret weapon, Roger Stevens.
Yeah.
Notice how I said Roger Stevens in a very early episode of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. I made the mistake of referring to him as Rogers Nelson,
Prince
which
in
is
Blind Melon.
which is Prince. Yeah,
No wonder, man, they really did have some good musical connections in the business.
Yeah, I was going to say, holy crap. No, yeah, but no, the guy was a genius level melodic lead line player, and some of his soloing was right there. So they had their own quirks to make them original enough. So yeah, really interesting origin story. And I guess part of it too is that when you're from Mississippi or if you're from Lafayette, Indiana, if you're not from places where people are from in the music business, you're going to have your own vocabulary, and you're going to have your own thing. It comes from, what else do you have to do other than like hang out in the garage and do drugs while you play music with your friends?
I know, right? And also, like, of all the bands to have connections with each other, Guns N' Roses and Blind Melon, these are two bands whose respective music are so completely different from each other.
Yeah.
If you listen to Blind Melon's music, it has more in common with, like, the Southern rock of the Allman Brothers and the neo hippie jam band movement of Fish than it does anything like sound resembling Guns N' Roses, street punk metal shit.
Yeah, it's almost like a more countryish version of the Black Crowes.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
in some respects. And so, yeah, the only thing they have in common was, they both Axl and Hoon had a very attuned ear for melody. So that was the one thing they had in common, is that they could find that melody, but in the context they found them in couldn't be more different, for sure. So that's really Blind Melon, and it sets up our discussion of this album that I loved. It's their self-titled record. It's from 1992. It didn't break until 1993. And I'll tell just sort of upfront personal story about it. I was a drama club kid. Maybe not a surprise to the people that know me, but you don't get a voice like this unless you're a nerd in drama club. And we had Hell Week for the show. We were doing the show Working, the Studs Terkel influenced musical. And I was, end of senior year, I was completely burned out. I was burned out on school, and I was working 30 hours a week at a grocery store, and I was an angry young man, and I was a burned out young man, and working this Hell Week, where it's long ass days, and I'm really tired. And one of the girls that was in the show was vibing on that record and brought it in one day, and I found myself immediately intrigued. She played it from the beginning, and I was like, whoa, I was drawn in by that kind of hippie-ish vibe, because I was into the alternative thing at that point, but this was a little softer, and it was kind of weird. At the same time, I made a connection, and this is what I do. I'm a free association guy, but another album that was getting played a lot that week was Gish by the Smashing Pumpkins. And there was a little bit of melodic overlap at least in some of the guitar stuff, believe it or not, between those two records at the time. I kind of, in a broader classification, put them together. And so that's what drew me in was really the guitar work, but also the softer nature of it, the more melodic, more dramatic nature of it. Hey, drama club, dramatic. Hey, get it? And so I caught onto the record and eventually became obsessed with it. And it really, and as we'll get into with the lyric, it had that theme of trying to escape your immediate past or your present, and then find yourself in a better place eventually, or having found yourself in a place, you've accrued instant wisdom. And that's something that I was craving. I was stuck in whatever, adolescent, underdeveloped romantic longings, or anger at my parents, and not sure what the hell was going on. And so it was a great soundtrack when you're 17 going on 18 and all kinds of fucked up.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I mean, there are other albums that appeal to me on that level. Blind Melon's album didn't appeal to me on that level. It appealed to me more like just the blissful hippiness of it and the musicianship. I'll go into this later when we're talking track by track, but and I'll probably mention this again when we get to the end of this episode. But I think what makes Blind Melon so special and unique among all 1990s rock bands is that they were one of the few, if not the only band, that bridged the gap between that Southern rock and plus neo-hippie jam band sensibility and they bridged the gap between that and basically the vulnerability and the sensitivity of alternative and indie rock.
And grunge. Yeah.
And grunge, too.
It was that vulnerability. That's the perfect
angst,
word.
And the angst. There's a lot of angst.
A lot of angst.
Blind Melon, too.
Yeah.
So they got and that's where Shannon Hoon comes in. The angst and the vulnerability and the sensitivity in his lyrics and the depth of it in his lyrics.
Yeah.
And putting that into the vernacular, I guess you would say, of Southern rock and neo-hippie jam band music.
Yeah.
And I'll go into this more in detail as we go into each song, but I think that's what made Blind Melon special. And that's what made them appeal to just, people who like hippie jam band music and Southern rock. And it made them appeal to grungers and alt rock kids as well.
Yeah. You articulated that remarkably well. It was all about mood. And it was that same mood. It was that confessional and that sort of realism. Obviously, the dawn of Nirvana. We talked about Death by Nirvana. That if you were pretentious and contrived, you soon died a quick death. And people, at least for a 2 or 3 year period, craved authenticity. And Hoon and his bandmates had authenticity in spades. Yeah. And again, I think that's why I made the Smashing Pumpkins connection. Eventually, I made a Pearl Jam connection because I was also obsessed with Pearl Jam's 10. That was the other record that was kind of well, everybody our age probably had a phase with Pearl Jam's 10, but that was kind of the parallel record to this. So that was really, really well said.
On this episode, we explored the career of the very underrated Blind Melon. For the next episode, yours truly, Curmudgeons, are closing out the calendar year, which can only mean one thing. It's time to give our picks for the best albums of the year. There will be no Parallel Universe segment this time, as Chris and I plan to keep things in our universe, and each of us will provide our selections for our top 10 albums of the year. There will be some agreement, but there's bound to be some feisty disagreement as well, if you know us. So, join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report close out the old year and ring in the new with the top 10 albums of 2023. All right, released September 1992, not really making a dent until the following year. Blind Melon's self-titled album, Blind Melon. Track by track, let's start. Track 1, Soak the Sin. Now, from the opening dagger riff, you already know that this band is steeped in Southern rock. But when Shannon Hoon sings about rednecks with Southern excess, you also know that this band is not out to draw fans of the Marshall Tucker Band. Let's put it that way.
True enough.
Like I said earlier, you can hear a bit of the Allman Brothers Band in how loose and limber they are. But they pair it with the speedy aggressiveness of the neo jam band movement of the time, epitomized by bands like Phish. Not even the subtle rhythmic shifts alienate the listener in what is a banging opening track. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. And what you noticed, a couple of things you noticed right away. One, you mentioned that looseness in
Yeah.
in the sort of the rumbling of the rhythm section. That's kind of a
I like to call it tight looseness.
yeah, tight looseness, and that's kind of the patented Blind Melon rhythm. They had that
Yeah.
kind of ba-dump, 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 ba-da-dump, ba-ba-dump, ba-ba-dump,
Yeah.
kind of undercurrent, but it was a little bit more unstable than that,
Right.
but they somehow kept it together. But also you realize just how articulate a singer Shannon Hoon was, and the power and the versatility in his voice. He had an emotional resonance, and
Yeah.
he could capture things. Like he had a very high register, he had a very low register. He could growl with the best of them. He was a performer. He wasn't just a
Yeah.
singer. He was a performer. And so this is just the band at its energetic best. It also establishes by the end of the song Roger Stevens as a star. The way he kind of rides the groove towards the end with this beautifully what would you call it? It's almost like a bell-like quality to the tone of
Yeah.
his guitar, and
Sure.
it has it doesn't really crackle and burn. It's more like a slow burn, but
Right.
it's a really passionate sound and a really passionate style, but it's athletic too. It's very agile and very spookily melodic song, especially right at the end. The outro is a real growler.
Yeah.
And it kind of builds to that. The rest of the song, might sort of be mid energy, and then it gets into this sort of angry coda,
Right.
which is kind of something that they do, and they build to these great outros throughout the record.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
this
it's
is
great.
this,
Yeah. One
yeah,
song after another. You have awesome
yeah,
outros.
awesome, awesome
The band was
outros.
brilliant at outros.
Yeah,
All right.
absolutely.
Speaking of the next one, track 2, Tones of Home. Blind Melon bring the funk. That's an underrated aspect of their music was the
Yeah,
funk. Funk
agreed.
was a big part of Blind Melon's sound. Blind Melon bring the funk and dose it with a generous helping of chunky white boy hippie groove. Hoon sings of his disenchantment with conventional American society that's effectively a smiling hippie counterpart to the dark, grungy vibes of the time, but is no less disaffected. If we can retrograde our curmudgeonly parallel universe to the early 1990s, this song would have been a huge rock radio hit that it deserved to be in real life. Chris?
Yeah, and it did reach minor hit status. Once No Rain hit, they followed and they chased that back up with Tones of Home, and so it did have a little bit of that fall '93. It had a little bit of a revival. It's my favorite song on the record. It's probably the best song on the record too, and it aspires to confidence I only wish I had.
Yeah.
There's a confidence of knowing who you are, knowing what you've been, not necessarily liking what you thought that you knew when you were a kid, and now you're standing on your own 2 feet. And so it's like it really captured where I wanted to be when I was 18. And lyric at the end is just fabulous, where he says, "All my friends, they patronize me. They say, 'Yo, hey boy, have you found what you're looking for?' It seems they don't really know me because it's here. It's what they can't see." And so almost talking about like faith in himself, and
Yeah.
again, not going with the crowd. It's like there's tones of home, and there's different types of tones. There's tones that you keep with you, the hometown values,
Yeah.
and knowing thyself, and sort of valuing your upbringing. And then there's the tones of home, the stuff that you don't like, all the caca and all the bullshit.
Yeah.
And so the way that he rides that, and then again, there's the bridge and the solo on this is just really, really funky and really skittering and just danceable.
Yeah,
It's,
sure.
it's danceable Roger Stevens.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
just, really, really just, great stuff. One of my favorite guitar solos of all time. There's a song, even now, how like there's songs even in your youth that you listen to so much that the earworms stay with you. Like you'll just be in the shower on a random Tuesday,
Yeah.
and like a part of it will come to you. And so I always hear that line about I always thought this would be the land of milk and honey, but I come to find out it's all hate and money. I always, like, once in a while that part will come to my head, and it's and again, it's part of it is just because of the great vocal performance on it and the conviction with which Hoon sang. The guy really was an amazing singer.
Oh, he was a fantastic
Yeah.
singer and frontman and personality. Like he was the face of the band for good
Yeah, yeah.
reason.
He had charisma in spades for better or worse,
Yeah.
which we'll
All
talk about in
right,
a little bit.
track 3. I Wonder is the name of the song. We can talk endlessly about the Southern fried and funk inspired rhythms and grooves on this album, but the ballads are just as memorable. This song not only has more than one monstrous riff that rivaled anything Lynyrd Skynyrd's trio of guitarists came up with, but also are just as elegiac and stately. It
Yeah.
even has a Freebird-esque breakneck speed tempo change that comes in the middle, unlike Freebird, where it comes at the end. And that little shift in dynamic separates this song and Blind Melon in general from other cliche Southern rock fodder that was out there. Chris?
There's actually two shifts in dynamics in this song,
Yeah.
which makes it amazing. So it starts off with this, like you said, elegiac acoustic opening, where it's just basically an acoustic guitar and Hoon's voice leading up, and it talking about loss of innocence and growing up becoming somebody else. Again, a big theme of this album of, he was 24 when he made it. So it was kind of like, oh, to be 24 and free from what I was when I was 18.
Yeah.
But so you get that, and then it builds into, like you said, it builds into that sort of rocked out, almost up tempo chorus and middle section of the song. And then at the end, you get this beautifully floating psychedelic outro that hooks off the line, "I only wanted to be 16 and free," which when I was 18, that line on more than one occasion made me cry. Yes, I was a sensitive, wimpy kid. And then again, it's one of Roger's. He leaves the hippie and he becomes more. It's almost like a Dickie Betts type of solo. It's almost Allman Brothers, but like Dickie had those like Sweet Melissa type solos that he could do. Where it has this. It's almost like the guitar is crying along with Hoon. It's a really, really neat trick. So yeah, this is one of the more ambitious songs on the record because it has those two shifts, but it makes for a perfect song suite because of that.
Right. All right. Track 4, Paper Scratcher. The appropriately titled Paper Scratcher has this chicken scratch riff that introduces a barn burner song with a lovely melodic chorus that would not feel out of place on a Black Crowes record at the time. Now, the Black Crowes were the other neo-Southern rock band that was big at the time. But for as good a lyricist as Chris Robinson was, Shannon Hoon didn't have his anger or bluster and seemed to have what I would call a charismatic vulnerability. It wasn't just, like I said before, it wasn't just alternative rockers and grungers who could be introspective, as Blind Melon made it okay for rock subgenres previously known for their machismo to show some introspection. Chris?
Yeah, this is another one of those songs that proved they had a flair for the dramatics, because I think Chicken Scratch is a great way to describe that that riff. I have it in my notes as twitchy. It starts off really, really twitchy, but then gets really, really pretty with this layered 2-part harmony, which I believe Hoon is doing both parts, but it's very lovely. And it again, it has that sort of I don't know what to expect from the world in the process of losing innocence type vibe. Right. And then again, it has another outro that it's almost arena rock, lighter rock. It's a little faster than that, but it has like an arena light your lighters, almost Bon Jovi-ish type of sensibility in terms of the grandeur of it. And so that's what this band, they had subtlety, but they also had grandeur. And again, another standout performance by Roger Stevens. Notice that there's a trend here. A third of the way through the record, there's a definite trend as far as the guitar quality of this record.
Yeah. All right. So what is next? What is next is track number. Is it number 5? Yes, it's track number 5.
It is number 5.
Dear Old Dad. Shannon Hoon wears his existential angst on his sleeve to the level of desperation on this track. And the band nimbly backs him up with what at this point is clear to be the band's sound, subtly complex Southern fried funk rock. But the beauty about Blind Melon is that their complexity isn't show-offy. In fact, it has a point, it has a direction, and it serves the song rather than vice versa. And that's a tricky thing to do that a lot of, especially today, a lot of contemporary bands and artists just can't grasp that dynamic.
Yeah, no, they can't. And I think this song for me is defined by Glenn Graham's drums. I think that there's a laid back jazziness even to his drumming on this, it's one of the hippier songs on the record. It's groovier and hippier and all of that. And maybe like just in a conventional sense, as far as I know. And actually, I remember this now. There was a video for this song that came out before No Rain. So it was one of the attempts to break them that didn't quite work. I remember this now. I don't know if they formally released it as a single, but they did try to get it on MTV. Didn't quite work. But maybe it's, besides No Rain, it's the most conventional song on the record. Right. But it has a sentimentality to it that which talks to a diversity of Hoon's range as a lyricist, that he could get. That he could get really confessional, but he could also be a little goofy too. Right. And so that maybe objectively, I guess you could say, if a critic, if a critic coming to this for the first time was to listen to this record, they might say that this is the best song on the record. Yeah. Well, they would be wrong. They probably would be wrong, because the next song is definitely better than that one. And I think the next song is the best song on the whole album. You and a lot of other people. Yeah. Track number 6, Change. The acoustic, I mentioned Marshall Tucker Band. The acoustic riff to the Marshall Tucker Band's Can't You See is adopted and adapted by Blind Melon on this song to startling effect on what is their greatest ballad and, like I said, in my opinion, the best song on the whole album. We live in a time where American redneck culture is more insufferable and toxic than it's ever been. But here is Shannon Hoon in 1992 saying, these are just sad people who are afraid of change. If Hoon had lived on to modern times, I wonder if he would have felt the same or would have had the same opinion. Anyway, nevertheless, it's a beautiful, gorgeously played, gorgeously sung, and gorgeously rendered ballad that proves rock music can be just as empathetic as the most gentle folk ballad. Chris? Yeah, and it's one of the better songs ever written about breaking free from depression. Yeah, for sure. And the idea of the way that I broke it was that I embraced that change. But for me, when I was 18, I was angry and depressed, and probably should have been on drugs even then. Yeah, as in psychotropics, folks. But it was aspirational for me. It was really kind of an inspiring song. This idea of when they say, "Hey, look at him. I'll never live that way. It's okay. They're just afraid of change." Right. Just really, really. Well, it's really moving. It's got a lot of pathos to it. Yeah, I mean, he was such an underrated lyricist. Underrated lyricist, underrated singer, and just, you're right, moving. And one of the things that makes it moving is they bust out the mandolin. Yeah, and not just the REM effect. It really adds. It's a perfect combination. It's a perfect companion to Hoon's voice and the message of the song. Because the sentiment comes from an organic place. It's transcending your own misery, and just there's a loveliness to the mandolin that sort of mirrors that transcendence. It's pretty cool. But I still, Tones of Home is, because of personal connection for me, is still my favorite song. But Change is a very close second. Yeah. Right. All right. Track number 7, the big hit, No Rain. I stand by what I said in this episode's parameter setter and intro. It still sounds to me like a low rent Grateful Dead. I still think it's the worst song on the album, and it's the track before Change that in our retrofitted parallel universe would have been the huge hit. That's just me. Chris? Yeah, actually, it's the song after Change on the record. Yeah. No, but Change is the one before No Rain. I think the track. Oh, I got you.
Yeah.
My bad. Hey, listening, dig it. So anyway, yeah, like I said, I think that it's a good song, and what I like about it is there's a kind of an ironic, sad, it's this juxtaposition of an ironic sadness next to a undying hopefulness,
Right.
and it may be the most purely hopeful song on the record.
Yeah.
It's not, it's not. There's other songs on here where he wears his wisdom on his sleeves,
Right.
but this is a subtly wise song, and clearly, like you said, it apes the Dead, but it also has, I mean, the pop hook was not manufactured by accident. I don't think.
Yeah.
I mean, this must have been programmed to get on the radio. But again, the amazing thing is, if it hadn't have been for that little overweight girl in the bee costume hitting
Yeah.
MTV, probably never happens. So
I wonder if Jerry, I wonder if Jerry Garcia, because he was alive during this time, Jerry Garcia. I wonder if he heard this song and said, "Hey, man, that guitar solo comes straight out of my tablature."
Yeah,
Because it really does.
pretty much. Yeah, yeah, pretty much. I mean, that's the end of it. Yeah, that's pretty much the finger picking. I mean, that's American Beauty at its finest. Yeah.
All right. Track number 8, Deserted. This rocker doesn't quite reach the heights that the tracks on the album's first half reach, but the interplay between the band is as stellar as always, and their patented, or what I call their patented tight looseness, quote unquote, is on display here, especially as the song slows to an end. Again, awesome outros. Chris?
Yeah, exactly. And it speaks to that rhythmic consistency that I mentioned, that Blind Melon had a patented beat.
Yeah.
You call it tight looseness, but it has that kind of badunk badunk. It's very similar in rhythm to Tones of Home. Not as good a song as Tones of Home, but it does have a jamminess to it, and
Sure.
and it gets kind of in a way a tad bit lysergic as in its middle part, and then where it repeats in the outro. Has this almost stretching, slowing, syrupy kind of vibe to it. That's and so the idea is that it speaks to that rhythm, even though it's not the greatest song, because it's so well constructed and because it's so consistent. It really kind of augments this record. It's by now you're listening to a better than average record and possibly a great record.
Yes.
By this point, but by the time you get to track 8, you know that you may be listening to something special. I definitely knew I was listening to something special by this point.
Right. Yeah. Track 9, Sleepy House, one word. From here on, the album settles into a mid-tempo groove. The sitar intro establishes the song's hazy, woozy, slightly psychedelic vibe, which is especially apt considering the song's title. But it's also lush and warm as the trippy guitar textures weave exquisitely with Shannon Hoon's soulful vocal delivery. It's one of the most gorgeous tracks on the whole album, I think. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just got this beautiful stretchiness to it. And here again, Roger Stevens adds another layer to it. It's almost slidey. I don't actually think it is a slide guitar, but it has this slidey slinkiness to it that really, and that lead part, it runs in parallel with Hoon's voice. It's a really really neat effect. But it's also, again, it's about that emotional vulnerability. That line, "If I can only show you how I feel, then you wouldn't bother me."
Yeah.
Those kinds of things. That this bashful young man syndrome, which I could definitely relate to. And then again, we keep talking about the outros here. They almost border on Indian raga vibes,
sure,
and which is a little bit of a surprise.
It's the psychedelic song on the album.
Oh yeah, it's absolutely the psychedelic song on the album. Again, it's that parallel lead guitar harmonic part along with Hoon's vocal performance. Really really special.
Track number 10, Holy Man, one word again. It was only a matter of time before the influence of Appalachian folk music would make its appearance, and it does so on this track before it delves into Blind Melon's patented Southern funk rock. The melody of this song is what is most striking, both in the verses and the chorus. Actually, melodic richness in his vocal delivery, something Shannon Hoon rarely gets credit for. Chris?
Yeah, it's basically it's an ironic gospel. Especially that first verse, where it's this soaring vocal. But essentially, what he's doing is he's not downright discounting religion. He's just saying that I can't get from the priest what he thinks I need, or what I think I need. It's just not going to happen in that relationship. So it's not an outright rejection of religion, but it's just sort of, once again, a wise statement of independence. But But yeah, it's a neat trick, and like you said, given that they're Mississippi boys, it was only a matter of time before they snuck this influence in, and so it really adds to the record. So like Sleepy House and Holy Man back to back, now that's a vibe.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, which makes the next song kind of a bum trip.
Oh, totally does. It's the only other song I don't like, Seed to a Tree, track number 11. I'm not a fan of this song. Dopey riff, clunky lyrics, cliched imagery. It's also a bit too meandering and plotting for my tastes. It kind of goes nowhere. I guess this is what people who don't like Blind Melon think Blind Melon sound like all the time.
Probably. And the one redeeming quality is that he gives all these rambling thoughts while he's taking a shit. He pronounces that he's on the shitter in the opening line of the song. Exactly. And so, but again, it reminds that theme again of moving away from what he was, and it's kind of a final screw off to, I guess, a romantic relationship, and just sort of, using that metaphor, the seed to a tree, that I once was a seed, now I'm becoming a tree. But also there's almost this mournfulness that he can't go back and confront his demons that he was dealing with back then. It's like, okay, I've reconciled them, but I'd like to go back and head them straight on. Yeah. So exactly. that's the only. So one, the taking the shit part, but two, there is a little bit of depth there. It's just not a great song. It's just it plots.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the right word, plotting.
Yeah. Track number 12, Drive. Now,
very Skinnerd.
Yeah. Well, songs named or containing the word drive in them are usually pretty great. You have the Beatles, Drive My Car. You have the Cars, Drive. You have REM's Drive. Yeah. You have the Breeders, Driving on 9. Well, there's also Sammy Hagar's I Can't Drive 55.
Oh, come on, which is the best of those songs.
Come on. You get out of here. I can't drive 55.
Put your ass in the city joint.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Nevertheless, Blind Melon follows in the good tradition of this word with their own song called Drive. A meditative, almost mournful, mid-tempo conversation between two people in a crumbling friendship. It's powered by one of the loveliest lead guitar lines on the whole album that haunts the song in much the same way Shannon Hoon's Angst does. Chris?
Yeah, and this does contain some great slide work from Stevens. And it has that Skinnerd, Black Crowes kind of, this is definitely the bluesiest song on the record. It gets there, I mean, Holy Man has that kind of gospel blues vibe, but this is like straightforward blues rock, and proves that they could do it very, very well, which is funny because it has that kind of rage in the beginning part, and then it goes hippie.
Yeah,
it goes hippie in the chorus.
That's what they were all about. I mean, they never went too far with the anger. Shannon Hoon always wanted to balance lyrically, at least balance the anger with tenderness.
Yeah, but and also another dynamic, another example of how they were very, very talented and very, very smart about how they shifted dynamics. Right, that they knew how to build songs from seemingly disparate parts, and and then the mood. It's like a mood salad. Right. but a lot of the elements, and of course by this point in the record, you're like, this might be a damn near classic. And then when you're 18, you're like, oh boy, it's like, I live in this record. This record is about me. And I'm not kidding. Maybe I was delusional, folks, but I think we've all had that experience of like thinking that we're the only one that this album applies to. Yeah. And this record spoke to me. and where I was emotionally.
Right.
Speaking of which, let's get to the next song, the album closer.
Yeah, the album closer, Time, track number 13. Blind Melon's classic self-titled debut, which is his, ends in epic form with Time, a song that encapsulates all the best parts of Blind Melon's intoxicating sound. The southern rock riffs, the funk grooves, the jazzy syncopations and rhythm shifts, the vulnerability and angst normally associated with alternative and indie rock, all puts it all together into a satisfying and glorious whole. It's a song that ragingly cascades, but then ends in a slow burn that leaves one breathless and thinking that they've just heard an all-time rock classic.
Yep. Stevens ends the record again on another strong note with his coda. But this is definitely the darkest song on the record. I mean, it's basically a good old ditty about stalking. You know, a couple of lyrics on there, you know, my mind is playing tricks on me all the time to let you know that I am real. And not only that, but there's the imagery of him, you know, taking a pee on the porch while watching you from the bushes where you can't see me. And another line of, are you fed up with me? So basically he ain't taking rejection well. Either that or the girl just doesn't know that she's rejected him. So it's just some pretty dark shit.
So yes, there was a follow-up to this amazing album. It came out in 1995 in the spring. I remember I was still in college, and so were you, Chris. And the name of the album is Stoop. Chris, tell us a little bit about Soup.
Yeah, and actually, this album came out in September of 1995.
Really? I thought it was spring.
Yeah. Nope, it was September of 1995. It came out right at the beginning of our junior years at Syracuse University.
Okay,
and obviously, because I was so in love with the first record, I eagerly anticipated this release, thinking it would be the greatest thing ever because this band was the greatest thing ever. And of course, they were going to grow. And what happened? I was sorely disappointed. And not because it was a bad record. It just, one, it wasn't what I was expecting, but two, it wasn't anywhere near as accessible. This was story of this record was, you know, by then, you know, they were enjoying their high profile and, you know, they had eschewed convention originally by developing their sound. And I think they felt cornered and wanted to eschew even further. So they moved to New Orleans and got more experimental. They brought in some brass band stuff. They did some folk. They did a little bit more acoustic type of vibe. They brought in some strings, those types of things. But the songs themselves were kind of a mashup and kind of, you know, there were shifts in dynamics. They just weren't as smooth. And they were more startling and a little bit more psychotic. I guess it's no coincidence that they have admitted, the surviving members of the band, that they were doing a lot of drugs.
Not just Shannon Hoon, the others.
Not just Shannon Hoon, but the band as a whole. But you know, as I said, you know, they were looking to eschew convention. Here's a great quote from Hoon from an Indianapolis Star interview that he did in September 1995, which is a month before, as we'll establish, he died. He says, quote, "You see, some of the critics, they, instead of falling over their tongue, they quickly spit the album out as a piece of shit. And to me, it's kind of just, it's obvious that the person that doesn't have the patience to really sit down and listen to anything more than one time. And it's like, it's that whole don't bore us, get to the chorus type of mentality. So, I mean, to me, I was always a fan of records that you had to kind of sit and soak with them for a little while. I always liked that about Pink Floyd records. You could never really figure out why you liked it, but you always, first, for a certain kind of mood, you would always put one of those records on, like Saucer Full of Secrets, which is kind of weird. But anyway, there was always this mood that maybe only came around like once or twice a week, but it was the kind of mood that ended up being like 3 or 4 times a week. And then the next thing you knew, the thing was permanently locked into your CD player. We were definitely aware of that, though. I'm in a band where, fortunately enough, there's 5 songwriters, so there's never just one guy writing all the stuff, so it's never monotonous. And sometimes some people like to hear bands that repetitively play the same songs, basically over and over, just with different words. And I think that we're a little bit different than that, which is kind of funny because he's like, what he's describing is the same process that I went through with the first Blind Melon record of like, whoa, and then he's like, well, and we're going to get away from that accidentally.
Yeah.
So it's kind of ironic, and it's a little bit sad that, they wanted to take on the world, but they just didn't have, by then they just didn't have the appropriate focus, and they were on mission, but they were ambling off the path by then. Your opinion, Arturo?
To me, Soup, like recording in New Orleans was apt, because what it sounds like to me they were going for is they're trying to get take their Blind Melon sound and have it warped by two factors. One, the weird Cajun funk of Dr. John, and the weird Southern Gothic folk of the band, and mash those two together and inject them into the Blind Melon sound and screw it up. And they did do that. They succeeded in doing that, but the songwriting just wasn't quite up to par, because it couldn't bring the disparate elements together enough. However, I really do like the single Galaxy, because it has that light and shade, and it does have the progressive leanings that the whole album is going for, but it encapsulates it all into one really good 3 or 3.5 minute song.
Yeah, it's efficient.
It's efficient, and it's got that light and shade effect that's reminiscent less of Led Zeppelin, but oddly more of Jane's Addiction, especially in the really melodic chorus part of it. And so that's why I always likened that song too. I really love Galaxy. I think it's one of the more underrated singles of the 1990s. But as a whole, I agree with you. Soup is a bit missing. It's a great idea that just doesn't coalesce, because the band members are all fucked up. They weren't writing good songs at that point.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, Soup is an apt title for the record. I will say this: I'll give it up for one more song on the record called "Skinned," which is a country ditty about the inspired by the serial killer Ed Gein, who was most famous for skinning his victims and turning the skin into furniture. And other household items that they found. I think they found a lamp, or they found a table that was made out of skin and bone. Those types of things. And so kind of a funny take on that. It's a pretty little ditty about a serial killer. So at their best, they still had that kind of sense of humor and that kind of at that point, it's not so much about wisdom so much as it is about decadent living. I think that's kind of what kind of crept into the songs there. But again, love them for the ambition, love them for the experimentation, not so much on the result, which is really, really disappointing, because it's, you think about, like, we've done an album, or we've done an episode on great first records. Yeah. And, this was just a total bum crash coming off that debut record. A really, really hard crash. So incredibly disappointing.
Yeah. Well, the disappointment gets greater in the Blind Melon story. Starting in 1993, just as the band hit it big, like we just alluded to, Blind Melon fell into the usual rock star trappings of drug and alcohol excess, and singer Shannon Hoon in particular fell victim to addiction. Various stints in drug rehab were unfortunately unsuccessful for Hoon. Going against his latest drug counselor's advice, the band went on tour in the fall of 1995. Hoon eventually died of a cocaine-induced heart attack on the band's tour bus on October 21st in New Orleans at the age of 28. Had he died just 1 month earlier, he would have been a member of the 27 Club. It took several years for the band, amidst much internal band friction, to realize that Shannon was really irreplaceable, as not only the band's singer and lyricist, but as their creative figurehead. They officially broke up in 1999. However, in 2006, the band reunited with a new singer named Travis Warren, and a year later started touring again. In 2008, Blind Melon released their third official album called For My Friends, which I must admit I never listened to. They toured through both the US and Europe during that year, and Warren left the band after the tour concluded. Travis Warren returned to the fold 2 years later as Blind Melon played sporadic shows toward the end of 2010. In 2012, they toured South America and Europe. In 2018, guitarist Christopher Thorne said on a podcast that the band was working on songs for a new album. In 2019, instead of what would have been their fourth album, Blind Melon released a standalone single called Way Down and Far Below. This was followed by 4 more singles that spanned from 2019 through 21, and we haven't heard from them since. Chris?
Yeah, and it should be mentioned, by the way, that they did have one additional release in 1996. It was a B-sides and outtakes unreleased album called Nico. Basically, they were emptying out the coffers at that point as a tribute to Shannon Hoon, and also in honor of his newborn daughter. He had just become a father before he died, and his daughter's name was Nico. It talks about his rock and roll sensibilities for sure. Right there. But it is a shame that that this band, if they could have gotten their heads on straight, they still had a future, because Galaxy was a modest hit, at least on alt rock charts. And they still had a profile, and they always could have had that, hey, remember those B-girl guys? Revival. And you never know, they could have been able to score a comeback, and or at least going on the nostalgia touring circuit. You still have the bands like well, I was going to say Soundgarden, but not Soundgarden anymore. But like even the Weezers and the sort of the bands that haven't been big for a while, but still get guys like us to buy tickets. Dad rock bands. All these bands have become dad rock bands, and I think Blind Melon would be a very successful dad rock band had they made it through. And so it's a damn shame. And don't do drugs, boys and girls. But at least
don't do some drugs. Certain drugs you shouldn't do.
Right. Yeah. Some drugs you shouldn't do. Which is a damn shame, because Shannon Hoon was on his way. He could have been a true rock and roll hero. He had the goods. He was a star. He was a bright shining star in the rock and roll galaxy. And his sensibilities are forever captured on the album, the self-titled album, Blind Melon. Go out and get it if you haven't heard it, or hit the streaming services, or hell, hit YouTube. I'm sure it's all over YouTube as well.
Sure.
Check out this album. You will not be disappointed. We're showing our age with this one, but for a reason. It's a damn good record that stands the test of time. And with that, as we do at the end of these episodes, we encourage everyone to join our curmudgeonly community on Facebook. Good times up there. Arturo just put up his list of the 1995 studio albums of what he thinks are the best studio albums, and that's actually a really good list. Long.
A lot of great albums came out that year.
Yeah, almost 50 albums on there, but he leaves out a couple conveniently.
I mentioned the 3 that I left out for good reason. But if you want me to explain, go to our Facebook page and ask me, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeon rock. You can also drop us a line if you also have fond remembrances. And here's a challenge, folks. We really want to know what your 18 and Fried-Eyed album was that you thought only belonged to you and was the best CD you owned when you were 18. curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. Twitter, we're fading into that great night, but we're still there for good reasons, like guys like Super 70 Sports that puts out some of the funniest content on the entire web. So anyway, check us out there. We still contribute posts once in a while. And then, look out for some Spotify reference. We'll probably put this up there at some point. So with that, we will talk to everyone in a couple of weeks when we and myself and Arturo, we reveal our top 10 records of this year.
Yeah. There'll be some overlap. There'll be some differences as well.
Yep. There you go, folks.